The dirt road cut through the dry fields like a razor-sharp scar on the horizon, glowing orange under the fading sunset. The air was thick and hot, carrying the scent of dust and sun-scorched grass. Silence stretched over the landscape, broken only by the distant hum of an approaching engine. Officer Odessa Harlow of the Rural Patrol drove slowly, her keen eyes scanning the surroundings. Most of the calls she received in this area were about stray cattle or disputes between ranchers, but something about this night felt different. A strange chill ran down her spine as her headlights illuminated a dark silhouette standing in the middle of the road. It was a Colt. Small, thin, its black coat gleaming under the trembling light of dusk. Odessa frowned and eased her foot off the gas, her chest tightening as she noticed the way the young horse trembled. He didn't just look scared, he looked like he was waiting for something. She pulled over, stepped out, and slowly approached, careful not to startle him. "What are you doing out here all alone, little one?" she murmured, her voice soft but laced with concern. The colt blinked, his large, deep eyes fixed on her. That was when Odessa saw it, a burn mark on his flank, as if someone had tried to erase a brand. A shiver ran through her. This wasn't just a case of abandonment. Odessa reached for her radio to report the situation. But before she could speak, the colt lifted his head and stared into the darkness of the road, as if expecting something. Then, a sound cut through the silence, the distant rumble of an approaching engine. Headlights glowed as a vehicle rounded the bend in the dirt road, and Odessa's stomach clenched. Her instincts screamed that this car was no coincidence. Before she could react, the colt turned and bolted, vanishing into the night. With her heart now pounding, Odessa ran after him. She didn't know it yet, but what she would uncover that night would change her life forever. If you want to find out what happens next in this mysterious and suspenseful story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep bringing you amazing content. Now, are you ready to uncover the secrets this night holds? Then let's continue. Odessa sprinted down the dirt road, her breath quick and uneven as the colt vanished into the tall grass. The sound of an approaching engine grew louder behind her, sending a chill down her spine. She turned just in time to see a black SUV roll to a slow stop, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Something about the vehicle felt off, too polished, too out of place on this deserted road. The driver's side window rolled down just enough for a voice to slip through. "That's my horse," the man inside said, his voice deep and controlled. Odessa squinted, trying to see his face, but the shadows concealed his features. He wore a suit, an odd choice for someone supposedly searching for a lost colt in the middle of nowhere. She crossed her arms, her instincts on high alert. "Is that so?" she asked, her tone firm. The man hesitated for a moment before responding, "Yes. He got loose earlier today." Something in his voice lacked conviction, and Odessa wasn't buying it. She glanced toward the grass where the colt had disappeared. "What's his name?" she asked, watching the man closely. A pause. It was barely a second, but it was long enough. "Does it matter?" he finally said, his tone now edged with irritation. That was all she needed to hear. Odessa straightened, her hand hovering near her holster. "It does if you're claiming ownership. Because from where I'm standing, this horse looks abandoned." The man exhaled sharply, as if debating his next move. "Look, officer," he said, his voice quieter but no less calculated. "I'll make it worth your while. Just tell me where he ran off to, and I'll handle it from here." Odessa's stomach turned. This wasn't about retrieving a lost animal. This was about covering something up. She took a step closer. "Step out of the vehicle," she ordered. The man let out a soft chuckle, as if amused by the situation. "That won't be necessary," he muttered. Without warning, the SUV's tires spun against the dirt, kicking up a thick cloud of dust as the vehicle sped off into the night. Odessa shielded her eyes, coughing as she grabbed her radio. "Dispatch, "This is Officer Harlow. Suspect just fled the scene in a black SUV, possible involvement in animal cruelty." Static crackled before the dispatcher's voice came through. "Copy that, Odessa. Do you have a plate number?" She clenched her jaw, watching the dust settle over the empty road. "Negative. Too much debris." A rustling sound made her turn. There, standing at the edge of the road, was the Colt. His dark eyes were wide with fear, but he hadn't run. He had waited. Odessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Slowly, she stepped forward and extended her hand. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now." The Colt hesitated before pressing his muzzle against her palm. As she gently stroked his soft fur, one thought burned in her mind. Who was that man, and what was he hiding? Whatever the answer, Odessa knew one thing. This was just the beginning. The Colt stood still as Odessa gently ran her fingers along his neck, feeling the slight tremor beneath his skin. He was exhausted, malnourished, and clearly traumatized. The burn mark on his flank still bothered her. It wasn't just an accident. Someone had deliberately tried to erase a brand, a clear sign that this Colt had a past someone wanted to hide. Odessa exhaled slowly, her mind racing. Whoever that man was, he had been desperate to take this horse back. But why? She grabbed her radio again. "Dispatch, I'm bringing in a rescued animal. Possible evidence of abuse and illegal ownership. I'll need a vet on standby." The dispatcher confirmed, and Odessa opened her patrol car's back door. To her surprise, the Colt didn't resist when she gently led him forward. He hesitated only briefly before stepping inside, his legs trembling from exhaustion. Odessa secured him as best she could before sliding into the driver's seat, her eyes flickering to the dark road ahead. The ride back to town was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She couldn't shake the feeling that this case was bigger than just a neglected horse. If someone was willing to go to such lengths to retrieve him, it meant there was something valuable or dangerous about his past. As she pulled into the town's small veterinary clinic, she was already preparing herself for whatever came next. Dr. Elias Mercer, the local vet, was waiting by the entrance, his brows knitting together as she approached. Odessa barely had to explain before Elias was examining the Colt with careful hands. He traced the burn mark with a frown. "Someone tried to destroy his brand," he muttered. "But not completely." He adjusted the clinic's overhead light and tilted the Colt's body slightly. Underneath the burned tissue, faint remnants of a marking were still visible. Odessa leaned in, squinting. It was difficult to read, but the outline of letters began to take shape. The rest was obscured. "Can you recover the full brand?" she asked. Elias sighed. "It'll take some work, but I can try." Odessa straightened, a strange feeling settling in her chest. This wasn't just any horse. This Colt belonged to someone important. And someone else had gone to great lengths to make sure no one ever found out. As she turned toward the clinic's front desk, ready to start digging into local records, her phone buzzed. A restricted number. She hesitated before answering. "Officer Harlow," she said. A pause. Then, a voice, low, calm, and unmistakably familiar. "You should have let him go." Odessa's blood ran cold. The line went dead. Odessa stood frozen, the dead silence of the phone call lingering in her ears. The voice had been calm, deliberate, a warning. Whoever that man was, he hadn't just given up when he drove off. He was watching, and he wanted her to know it. She lowered the phone slowly, forcing herself to take a steady breath. Fear was an old acquaintance in her line of work, but this was different. This wasn't some bar fight or a domestic dispute. This was calculated. This was personal. She glanced over her shoulder at the Colt, who stood quietly under the clinic's soft lights as Dr. Mercer continued his examination. The young horse had no idea that he was at the center of something dangerous. Odessa turned back to Elias, her voice firm. "Can you keep him here overnight?" Elias looked up, concern flickering in his tired eyes. "Of course. But Odessa, if someone's willing to go this far over a horse, they won't stop now." She knew he was right. The smart thing to do would be to step back, let the authorities handle it. But something deep inside her, the same instinct that had made her stop for the Colt in the first place, told her that walking away wasn't an option. Determined, she drove to the station, her mind racing with questions. The brand on the Colt's flank, SAR, had to be the key. A ranch, maybe? A breeder? She spent the next hour digging through ownership records, searching for any ranches or businesses with those initials. Finally, something caught her eye: Silver Ridge Stables. The name sent a jolt through her. The property had been owned by the Radcliffe family for decades, a family known for their wealth, influence, and more recently, scandal. Odessa scanned the records, her pulse quickening. Silver Ridge had once been a top-tier breeding facility, but 2 years ago, it had suddenly shut down. Rumors had spread: embezzlement, fraud, even accusations of animal cruelty, but nothing had ever been proven. The Radcliffes had gone silent, their estate abandoned. If the Colt had come from there, why was someone trying to erase his past now? A sudden noise outside made her stiffen. A car engine, idling just beyond the station's parking lot. Odessa stood slowly, moving toward the window. Headlights cut through the darkness, unmoving, watching. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the vehicle turned and disappeared into the night. Odessa clenched her fists. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a warning. And she had just made herself the next target. Odessa didn't sleep that night. She stayed at the station, poring over records, searching for any connection between Silver Ridge Stables and the man who had confronted her on the road. But the deeper she dug, the more questions surfaced. The Radcliffes had once been one of the wealthiest equestrian families in the state, breeding champions, hosting elite competitions, until their empire collapsed overnight. Their finances had been drained, the ranch abruptly shut down, and the family had all but disappeared from the public eye. What happened to them? And how was this Colt connected to it all? By sunrise, she had found her first real lead. Buried in an old legal report, she found the name Jasper Radcliffe, the youngest son of the family. He had been a promising horse trainer before the scandal, but after Silver Ridge shut down, he had vanished. No known address. No employment records. Nothing. A man erased from existence. Odessa had a gut feeling that Jasper was the man in the SUV. And if he was willing to threaten a police officer to get that Colt back, it meant he was hiding something much bigger. She grabbed her keys and drove straight to the vet clinic, her pulse hammering. When she walked in, Dr. Mercer was already in his office, looking pale. "Odessa," he said, voice tight, "we have a problem." He led her into the stable where the Colt had been kept overnight. The stall was empty. The door had been forced open. The Colt was gone. Odessa's stomach dropped. "When?" she demanded. "Sometime after midnight," Elias said. "I checked on him before locking up, but when I came in this morning, the stall was open. No sign of forced entry on the clinic itself. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Odessa clenched her jaw. Jasper had taken him back. But how had he known the Colt was here? Unless he had someone on the inside. A traitor. The thought sent a cold wave through her. Someone was feeding him information, watching her every move. And she had walked right into it. Her phone buzzed. A restricted number. Again. She answered, voice sharp. "Where is he?" A pause. Then, the same chilling voice as before. "I warned you, Officer Harlow. This isn't your fight." Odessa gritted her teeth. "That Colt doesn't belong to you. And you know it." A low chuckle. Then, walk away. before you end up like them." The line went dead. Odessa stared at the screen, her grip tightening. Like them? Was he talking about the Radcliffes? What had really happened to them? There was only one place to get answers now: Silver Ridge Stables. And Odessa was going there, no matter what waited for her. What do you think really happened to the Radcliffes? And how far should Odessa go to uncover the truth? Drop your theories in the comments. The road to Silver Ridge Stables was long and desolate, winding through miles of overgrown fields and rusting fences. The morning sun did little to chase away the unease tightening around Odessa's chest. Everything about this place felt abandoned, forgotten. But she knew better. Someone had been here recently. Someone who didn't want to be found. She pulled up to the front gates, which hung lopsided on their hinges, the once grand emblem of the Radcliffe estate now cracked and weathered. "Sir." The same initials burned into the Colt's flank. The air was thick with silence as she stepped out of her car, hand instinctively resting near her holster. The main barn loomed in the distance, its roof sagging, its windows shattered. But it wasn't empty. Odessa could feel it. She wasn't alone. She moved carefully through the entrance, the scent of dust and decay filling her lungs. The stalls were mostly empty, save for broken equipment and remnants of a past long buried. Then she saw it, hoof prints in the dirt. Fresh. Someone had brought a horse in recently. Her heartbeat quickened as she followed the tracks deeper into the barn, past collapsed beams and cobweb-covered saddles. And then, in the dim light of the back stalls, she saw him. The Colt stood tethered to a post, his dark eyes flickering with recognition as he spotted her. He wasn't alone. A man stood beside him, his back turned, adjusting the bridle. Slowly, he straightened. Odessa knew before he even turned around. Jasper Radcliffe. "You really don't know when to quit," he murmured, finally facing her. His sharp features were worn with exhaustion, his suit now replaced by a dusty flannel and worn jeans. He didn't look like a man running from the law, he looked like a man running from ghosts. Odessa squared her stance. "Where's the rest of your family, Jasper?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Gone." The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Odessa didn't blink. "Gone how?" Jasper exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "You already know the answer," he muttered. "You just don't want to believe it." He gestured to the Colt. "He's the last one. The last proof of what they did." Odessa's pulse pounded. What they did. She took a slow step forward. "What happened here, Jasper?" For a long moment, he was silent. Then, finally, he spoke. "They killed them." The words sent a shiver down her spine. "My father," Jasper continued, voice hollow. "He made deals. Bad ones. The kind you don't walk away from. When he couldn't pay his debts, they didn't just take the money. They took everything. The horses. The land. My family." His jaw tightened. "Burned the records. Buried the truth. This Colt? He's the only thing they didn't get." Odessa's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about stolen horses. This was about murder. The floor creaked behind her. Odessa barely had time to react before a gunshot rang through the barn. She hit the ground as a bullet splintered the wood beside her. Jasper cursed, grabbing the Colt's lead as a shadowed figure stepped out from the darkness, gun raised. Odessa caught a glimpse of a gloved hand, a flash of a familiar black SUV outside. The same men who had erased Silver Ridge were back to finish the job. Jasper yanked the Colt free as Odessa reached for her gun, her heart pounding. She had come for answers. Now, she was fighting for survival. The echo of the gunshot still rang in Odessa's ears as she hit the ground, rolling behind a stack of rusted feed barrels. Splinters of wood rained down where the bullet had struck, missing her by inches. Whoever was after Jasper wasn't here to threaten him anymore. They were here to kill. Jasper yanked the Colt's lead, urging him toward the back exit of the barn. "We have to move," he shouted. Odessa risked a glance around the barrels, catching sight of a man in a black jacket, his gun raised, advancing toward them. His face was obscured by shadows, but his posture was eerily calm. He had done this before. Odessa didn't hesitate. She fired first. The bullet struck a wooden beam near the man's shoulder, making him duck back into the darkness. It bought them seconds, but not much more. Jasper pulled the Colt toward a broken side door, shoving it open. "There's a back trail, leads to the river," he said urgently. Odessa knew running blind wasn't a great plan, but staying meant dying. She covered their retreat, moving backward while keeping her gun trained on the shadows. Another gunshot. This one closer. Odessa felt the sharp sting as something grazed her arm, the heat of the bullet slicing through fabric and skin. She bit back the pain, sprinting after Jasper as they broke into the overgrown brush behind the barn. The Colt galloped ahead, his hooves thudding against the dirt path, instinct driving him toward safety. Odessa's breath burned in her lungs, but she didn't dare slow down. Behind them, the sound of heavy boots crushed the dry grass. They were being hunted. They reached a clearing near the riverbank, the moon reflecting off the dark water. Jasper halted, his chest heaving. "They won't stop," he muttered, his voice shaking. "They never do." Odessa reloaded, her fingers slick with sweat and blood. "Then we make them." A branch snapped nearby. The gunman was closing in. Odessa turned just in time to see the shadowed figure emerging from the trees. His gun raised, his stance unwavering. But before he could pull the trigger, a sudden, thunderous sound filled the air. Hooves. The Colt charged. With a burst of speed, the young horse rammed into the gunman, knocking him off balance. He stumbled, his shot going wild, missing both Odessa and Jasper. The gun clattered to the ground as the man hit the dirt hard, cursing in pain. Odessa didn't hesitate. She kicked the weapon away, pinning the attacker down with her knee, gun aimed at his head. "Game over," she growled. The man glared up at her, blood trickling from his temple. But he wasn't afraid. He just smiled, a slow, knowing grin. "You think this ends with me?" he rasped. "You have no idea what you've started." Odessa's pulse pounded. This wasn't over. Not even close. The man beneath Odessa's knee coughed, spitting blood into the dirt. But even with a gun pointed at his head, he didn't look afraid. He looked amused. "You don't get it, do you?" he rasped. "You think you saved that horse? You think you saved yourself?" He let out a low chuckle. "You just made yourself their next problem." Odessa pressed the barrel of her gun harder against his temple. "Who are they?" she demanded. "Who do you work for?" The man just smirked. "You already know." She clenched her jaw. Whoever was behind this had power. Enough to erase an entire family, enough to send a professional killer after them without hesitation. Jasper was breathing heavily beside her, his hands still gripping the Colt's lead as if letting go would mean losing everything. The young horse snorted, pawing at the dirt, restless and tense. The sound of distant sirens cut through the night. Odessa had called backup the second they hit the back trail. Help was minutes away, but she knew deep down the real danger wouldn't be waiting for them at Silver Ridge. It would be waiting in the places they couldn't see. The places where men like this disappeared and bigger threats took their place. The gunman's gaze flickered past her, toward the trees. Odessa barely had time to register the movement before a pair of headlights flashed through the darkness. A second vehicle. Another SUV, creeping toward them like a predator stalking its prey. Jasper swore under his breath. "We need to move. Now." But Odessa held her ground. "They won't touch us with the cops on the way." The gunman laughed, wiping blood from his mouth. "You still don't get it, officer," he said, his voice dripping with something almost pitying. "The police don't scare them. The law doesn't scare them. Nothing does." The SUV sped up. Odessa's grip on the trigger tightened. If they were about to be taken out, she wasn't going down without a fight. But before she could react, the Colt suddenly reared up, his powerful legs slamming into the ground. The moment shattered. The gunman flinched. Jasper yanked Odessa back. "Run." She didn't hesitate. With the sound of screeching tires and shouts behind them, they tore through the trees, the Colt galloping ahead like he knew exactly where to go. Odessa's heart pounded. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Odessa's legs burned as she ran, the cold night air slicing through her lungs. The Colt led the way, darting through the trees with the kind of instinct only a horse born in the wild could have. Jasper was right behind her, his breath ragged, his footsteps uneven. Behind them, the roar of the SUV's engine grew louder. "They're catching up," Jasper shouted. Odessa didn't need to be told twice. The headlights cut through the dense trees, bouncing wildly as the vehicle barreled forward, tearing through the forest like a monster hunting its prey. Branches snapped. Tires skidded. These people weren't trying to capture them anymore. They were trying to eliminate them. Up ahead, the tree line thinned. Odessa's heart pounded as she saw what lay beyond. A ravine. The earth dropped off into a steep, rocky descent, leading to a rushing river below. No bridges. No way across. Jasper cursed. "We're trapped." The Colt skidded to a stop at the edge of the cliff, his breath coming in sharp bursts, ears pinned back. He knew the danger just as much as they did. Odessa spun around, raising her gun. The SUV screeched to a halt just a few yards away. The passenger door opened, and out stepped a man Odessa recognized instantly. William Calloway. The name alone sent a wave of nausea through her. Calloway wasn't just rich, he was power itself. A billionaire businessman, a political donor, a man whose name never appeared in court documents but whose money seemed to make cases disappear. If he was here, this went deeper than she had ever imagined. Calloway adjusted his jacket, stepping forward like he had all the time in the world. "You should have left well enough alone, Officer Harlow," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I don't enjoy loose ends." Odessa gritted her teeth. "That Colt doesn't belong to you." Calloway smirked. "That Colt belongs to me more than you'll ever understand." He glanced at Jasper. And so did his family. Jasper lunged forward, fury flashing in his eyes, but Odessa grabbed his arm, holding him back. "That's what this is about, isn't it?" she demanded. "The Radcliffes didn't just lose their fortune. You took it from them." Calloway sighed, shaking his head. Jasper's father owed a debt he couldn't pay. He gambled with things that didn't belong to him. So I took what was mine. He gestured toward the Colt. "That horse is the last thread connecting me to a past I'd rather erase. And now, thanks to you, I have to deal with it personally." The men by the SUV raised their guns. Odessa's stomach clenched. No backup. No escape. Just a drop into a river that could just as easily kill them as save them. Jasper's voice was barely a whisper. "Odessa?" She tightened her grip on her gun, but she knew the truth. They were out of time. There was only one choice left. She looked at Jasper, looked at the Colt, and then she made her decision. They jumped. The world became a blur of wind and gravity as Odessa plunged into the darkness below. The roar of the river swallowed everything. The shouts, the gunfire, the screech of tires above. Cold water slammed into her body like a brick wall, stealing the breath from her lungs. The current was stronger than she expected, twisting her violently, pulling her under. For a terrifying second, she couldn't tell which way was up. Then, a desperate force kicked against her hooves. The Colt. Through the churning water, Odessa caught a glimpse of him struggling beside her, his powerful legs kicking against the current. Jasper surfaced a few feet away, gasping for air. "Odessa," he choked out. She fought to stay above water, the freezing current numbing her limbs as they were carried downstream. The gunmen weren't shooting anymore. Either they assumed the river would kill them, or they didn't want to risk drawing attention. Good. Let them think they were dead. Minutes felt like hours before the river finally spat them out onto the muddy banks, coughing and shaking from the cold. Odessa rolled onto her back, her breath ragged, her heart still pounding from the fall. The Colt staggered to his feet beside them, trembling but alive. He had saved them. Jasper groaned, pushing himself upright. "That was insane," he panted. "You're insane." Odessa let out a weak chuckle, her body aching all over. "Yeah, well, it worked. They didn't have much time. Calloway wouldn't stop looking for them. He had too much to lose. But now so did they. They had proof." The Colt was living evidence of what had been done to the Radcliffes, to Jasper's family. They couldn't run forever. It was time to fight back. By dawn, they had made it to a nearby town, keeping to back roads, staying off the radar. Odessa used what little leverage she had left. Contacts in law enforcement she could trust, reporters who still cared about the truth. By noon, Calloway's name was everywhere. The Radcliffe scandal, buried for years, was dragged into the light. Financial records, missing persons reports, evidence of the cover-up. And in the center of it all, the Colt. Calloway tried to deny everything. He called it a smear campaign. But then, one of his own men flipped, trading testimony for immunity. The truth was undeniable now. Murder, fraud, corruption. By the end of the week, William Calloway was in handcuffs. Jasper stood beside Odessa, watching the footage on a diner's old TV screen. The news anchors were still scrambling for details, but the headline said it all. Billionaire William Calloway arrested in connection to Radcliffe family disappearance. Jasper exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "I never thought I'd see this day." Odessa glanced out the window, where the Colt stood in a trailer, waiting for his new life to begin. "You fought for it," she said. "You and him both." Jasper smiled faintly. "So, what happens now?" Odessa smirked. "That depends." She tossed her car keys on the table. "You up for raising a champion?" Jasper laughed, shaking his head. But as he looked back at the Colt, his last link to his family, to everything he lost and everything he had left, his expression softened. "Yeah," he murmured. "I think I am." Outside, the Colt raised his head toward the sky, ears pricked forward. He was safe, free, and finally, home. What a story! The Colt that was almost erased but fought to survive. What would you have done in Odessa's place? Comment below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, it really helps us out. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Share this with someone who loves mysteries and incredible stories. See you in the next video.